All right, strap yourselves in because today we're diving deep into sins of the father.
Ooh, this one's a doozy.
It really is. And you know how much I love a good morally gray area?
Oh, this story swims in it.
It throws us into this cyberpunk future, right? Siberian credits, red line trains, all that
All the
jazz.
futuristic trappings, yeah.
But it also doesn't shy away from some really tough stuff, poverty, addiction, family
The
struggles.
stuff that hits close to home no matter what century you're in.
Exactly. And the way it's told, man, it's like a puzzle box.
Jumping between characters, different timelines.
You're constantly trying to piece together what's real, what's memory, what's manipulation.
And just when you think you have a handle on who's good and who's bad.
Bam! The rug gets pulled out from under you.
No easy answers in this one, that's for sure.
Okay, so let's start with Addie, our main character.
The girl with fire in her veins, literally.
Right from the get-go, we're thrown into this tense scene at the train station, her and her father, who insists on being called Mr. Nice.
Which, given his behavior, is kind of chilling.
Major red flag, right? And then there's the death at the station.
Did Addie push that person? Did they fall?
It's deliberately ambiguous, leaving you questioning her role in everything that follows.
Like, is she a victim of circumstance? Or is there something darker at play?
And that question just lingers throughout the whole story.
Because even as we see her manipulated by her father, there are these moments where you see her trying to break free.
To figure out who she is outside of his influence, yeah.
That visit to Iris Guzman's house, that's a big one.
Talk about a reality check.
Addie is confronted with the consequences of her actions, the devastation she's helped cause.
It's brutal seeing her go from blissful ignorance to this gut-wrenching awareness.
Like she's been living in this bubble,
Yeah.
you know,
Yes.
and it bursts.
Do you think that's when she starts to understand the weight of her sins?
I think it's a process, right? It's not a light switch. It's more like layers being peeled back.
Ooh, I like that analogy.
Because even as she's wrestling with this guilt, we see these flickers of genuine connection with others.
Like Lucas, Iris's son.
Right. That scene in the backyard with them, it's almost like a breath of fresh air in this otherwise heavy story.
It shows this capacity for compassion in Addie, this yearning for something pure and innocent.
Makes you wonder if maybe deep down she's not that different from the bell beetle.
Oh, the bell beetle. I knew you were going to bring that up.
Couldn't resist. Such a potent symbol.
This tiny creature trying to survive in this harsh synthetic world.
It keeps popping up, almost like a little reminder, you know.
Of what, though? Innocence, hope, the fragility of life.
I think that's up to each reader to decide, which is what makes it so fascinating.
Okay, so we've got Addie, this girl caught between being a victim and potentially a perpetrator.
And then there's her father, the enigmatic Mr. Nice.
He is the antagonist, no doubt, but he's also so much more than that.
He's terrifyingly real, you know? Not some mustache-twirling villain, but this cold, calculating manipulator.
And yet we get these glimpses into his psyche, these moments where his mask slips.
Like that scene where he freaks out over the bell beetle.
Right. You have this ruthless figure suddenly paralyzed by fear of this tiny bug.
It's such a jarring contrast, and it makes you question, what else is he afraid of? What's he hiding?
And then his reaction to the red bandana, this symbol of Addie's family legacy.
Like it triggers something primal in him, almost a fear of her potential power.
It's like he recognizes her strength, even as he tries to suppress it. Which leads us to that lab scene, the end of chapter 4. The tension in that room, oh my God.
You can practically feel the temperature rising as Addie confronts her father.
It's like a powder keg waiting to explode.
And then, that transformation.
Yeah.
Is he becoming something monstrous? Is it all in Addie's head?
The author leaves us hanging, doesn't he?
He does, and I think that's intentional, leaving us to wrestle with our own interpretations.
Just like we're doing here today, basically.
Exactly. We're all detectives trying to untangle the threads of this story, the mystery at its heart.
So let's shift gears a bit and talk about some of the big themes and symbols running through Sins of the Father.
Ooh, yes. Let's unpack those layers.
Fire, that's got to be the big one, right?
It's everywhere. And it's so closely tied to Addie's abilities, her emotional state.
Destructive and transformative, just like Addie herself.
What does fire represent to you?
For me, it's this duality in Addie's character. She's capable of great love, but also this immense destructive power.
It's like she's walking a tightrope between those two extremes, trying to find balance.
And the fire, it's a symbol of that struggle.
And then there's the red bandana passed down from Addie's grandmother.
More than just a piece of cloth, that's for sure.
It's her family legacy, a connection to the past, maybe even a source of strength.
But it's interesting how different characters view it.
Right? For Addie, it's heritage, a reminder of the women who came before her.
But for her father, it's almost like a threat.
Like he sees it as a symbol of her potential to break free from his control.
And that terrifies him, doesn't it?
Absolutely. That tension, that power struggle, it's at the core of their relationship.
And then there's that whole idea of cyclical abuse, how it gets passed down through generations.
Addie's mother clearly suffered at the hands of Mr. Nice, and now Addie's trapped in that same cycle.
It's heartbreaking, but it's also a reality for so many people.
The story doesn't sugarcoat that. It shows the lasting impact of trauma, how it shapes lives and relationships.
It's tough to confront, but I think Sins of the Father does a powerful job of showing both the devastation of abuse and the potential for breaking those cycles.
It's a story about resilience, about finding hope, even in the darkest of places.
It makes you wonder if Addie's fire, so tied to her emotions, is like a manifestation of that inherited trauma.
Like a way for that pain to find an outlet.
So it's both a symptom of the abuse, but also maybe a tool for her to break free.
Right. Fire can destroy, but it can also purify, forge something new from the ashes.
Okay, let's lighten things up a bit and talk about the world building. That cyberpunk setting is so vibrant, so detailed.
Oh, it's amazing. Siberian credits, the red line, all these little touches that bring us to life.
But it's not just the futuristic tech, it's how the author grounds it in these human experiences.
Even with all the advancements, people are still struggling with poverty, addiction, the same relationship dramas we see today.
It's like the future might be different, but human nature, that stays pretty constant.
And I love how the author contrasts those high-tech elements with these moments of raw emotion,
The campfire scenes, they feel so timeless, so universal.
stripping away all the technology, bringing it back to just people, fire, stories.
Those basic human needs for connection, they don't change, do they?
Not even in a cyberpunk future.
Okay, let's circle back to Addie for a minute. I'm curious about that scene where she aces the herb lore exam.
Seems like a small detail,
Yeah.
but it's so telling about her inner conflict.
Yeah, she's clearly brilliant, this natural talent for herb lore.
But that talent comes from her forced involvement in her father's illegal operation.
So it's like this gift, this skill is tainted.
And she can't even reveal the true source of her knowledge, so she has to pretend it's just natural ability.
Adding another layer to her struggle,
Yeah.
right?
It's like she's carrying this secret shame, this burden she can't share with anyone.
In that isolation, it just fuels her anger and resentment, doesn't it?
Which all comes pouring out in that confrontation with Electra in the courtyard.
Talk about a turning point. We see the full force of Addie's power, both literally and figuratively.
It's terrifying and exhilarating watching her unleash those fire abilities.
It's like this primal force is unleashed, and it's both destructive and liberating.
And that blood on her hands at the end, it's a powerful image.
A literal stain, but also a metaphorical one, right? The guilt, the responsibility.
She can't deny the consequences of her actions anymore. The innocence is gone.
It's like the bell beetle, that symbol of hope. It dies in that moment.
It's interesting, isn't it, how both Electra and Mr. Nice react with fear to symbols of Addie's heritage, her strength.
The red bandana, her fire abilities, it's like they sense the power within her, and it threatens their own control.
That speaks to the larger themes of power and control that run throughout the whole story.
Addie is constantly being pulled between these opposing forces, trying to find her own voice.
And then there's that final confrontation with her father in the lab. Oh man, the tension is palpable.
Like a pressure cooker about to blow.
The temperature fluctuations, the rising thermometer, the author really nails that sense of mounting pressure.
And then that moment with the bell beetle where Mr. Nice is completely frozen.
It's almost funny, but it also reveals this vulnerability we haven't seen before.
Like this tiny creature pierces through his armor of control and shows the scared kid underneath.
And Addie sees it. She recognizes his weakness for a brief moment.
It's a shift in their power dynamic, for sure.
But then, boom, that shocking transformation at the end.
Mr. Nice becomes something else. Monstrous.
Or is it all in Addie's head? A manifestation of her own fear and trauma.
The author leaves it open to interpretation, which is brilliant and frustrating all at once.
It makes you question what's real, what's imagined, what's the nature of evil itself.
It's one of those stories that stays with you long after you finish it.
So, after diving deep into Addie's world, what are your biggest takeaways? What really resonated with you?
For me, it's how the story explores the lasting impact of trauma, how it shapes who we become.
I'm with you on that. And I'm also struck by the importance of human connection, even in this bleak cyberpunk world.
Those moments of compassion, like with Addie and Lucas, they offer these glimmers of hope.
They remind us that even in the darkest times, we're not alone.
And that brings us to that final scene with Addie's mother giving her younger self the red bandana.
Such a poignant moment, full of hope and foreboding all at once.
It's like, on one hand, it's this beautiful legacy, a passing down of strength and resilience.
But knowing Addie's future, it also feels like a burden, almost a curse she can't escape.
It's both, isn't it? A gift and a burden.
And it speaks to the complexity of family relationships, the desire to protect, but also the inevitability of facing the world's harsh realities.
And the bandana becomes a symbol of that duality.
The strength of the women in Addie's family, but also the reminder of their suffering.
It's like this tangible representation of their shared history, both the good and the bad.
It makes you wonder, are we destined to repeat the mistakes of our past? Or can we break free and forge our own paths?
Nature versus nurture, right? How much of who we are is predetermined, and how much is shaped by our experiences.
No easy answers, but Sins of the Father definitely suggests that both play a role.
One scene that stuck with me, it's when Addie's mother is sparring with her younger self, and Addie accidentally lands a punch that almost knocks the wind out of her.
Oh, I remember that scene. It felt significant, even though it was so small.
It's like this foreshadowing of Addie's potential for both violence and strength.
Even as a child, she has this power that can't be ignored.
It makes you wonder, in different circumstances, could that power have been channeled into something good?
It's tragic to think that in the world she's born into, it almost feels inevitable that it'll manifest in destructive ways.
But even amidst that tragedy, there's still that flicker of hope, that potential for something better.
Which brings us back to that question, right? If you were Addie, what choices would you have made differently? How would you break free from that cycle of abuse?
Tough questions with no easy answers.
But by engaging with Addie's story, we're forced to confront these complex issues, to examine our own beliefs and values.
Sins of the Father, it's a story that challenges us to think critically about the world, about the choices we make.
And that's what great literature does, right? It prompts us to ask difficult questions, to search for meaning.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what are you still pondering? What resonated with you the most?
For me, it's the exploration of trauma and also the power of human connection, even in the face of darkness.
I'm right there with you. And if you haven't read Sins of the Father yet, I highly recommend checking it out.
It's a story that will stay with you, make you think differently about the world and your place in it.
And remember, even in a world that often feels bleak, there's always potential for change, for growth, for hope.
Keep searching, keep questioning, and never underestimate the power of human connection.
Beautifully said. All right, folks, that's our deep dive into Sins of the Father. Until next time, happy reading.
It makes you wonder if, like, Addie's fire, so tied to her emotions, is it a manifestation of that inherited trauma, you know?
Oh, that's a really interesting thought, like a way for that pain to express itself outwardly.
Yeah, like it has this power to destroy, but also to purify, right? To kind of forge something new out of all that pain.
Okay, so we've talked about some pretty heavy stuff, but I gotta say, one thing I really enjoyed about Sins of the Father was the world building.
Oh, it's incredible, right?
So vivid, so detailed.
That cyberpunk setting, it just pulls you right in.
Hyperion credits, the red line train system, all these little
It
touches.
feels so real, you know?
But it's not just the futuristic tech that's cool.
No, it's more than that.
It's how the author grounds the story in these very human experiences.
Exactly. Like, even in this high-tech world, people are still dealing with poverty, addiction, the same relationship struggles we see today.
Right. It's like no matter how advanced we get, some things just never change, do they?
Nope. Human nature is pretty constant.
And I love how the author contrasts those futuristic elements with these moments of raw emotion.
Like what?
Like the campfire scenes, for example.
Oh, yeah, those are powerful.
They feel so timeless, so universal.
It's like stripping away all the technology, all the distractions, and bringing it back to the core of what it means to be human.
Just people, fire, stories.
Things that have connected us for centuries.
Okay, let's circle back to Addie's character arc for a second.
Okay, what about it?
I'm really intrigued by that scene in the classroom where she aces the herblore exam.
Oh, yeah, that one.
It seems like a small detail, but I think it speaks volumes about her internal struggle.
How so?
Well, on the surface, it's just Addie being good at something.
Right. She's smart. She's got a knack for it.
But when you consider where that knowledge comes from, her forced involvement in her father's illegal operation, it takes on a whole new meaning.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
It's like this gift she has, this skill, it's tainted by the way she learned it.
And she can't tell anyone the truth about it, can she?
Exactly. So she has to pretend it's all natural talent, which Just adds another layer to her internal conflict.
It's like carrying around this secret shame.
And that isolation, that inability to share the truth, it just feeds into her anger and resentment, doesn't it?
Definitely. It's like a pressure cooker building up inside her.
And then, boom, it all explodes in that confrontation with Electra in the courtyard.
Oh man, that scene.
We see the full extent of Addie's power, both literally and figuratively.
It's terrifying, but also kind of thrilling, Seeing her unleash those fire abilities.
Like this primal force just bursts out of her.
And that image of the blood on her hands at the end, it's haunting.
It's a literal stain, but also a metaphorical one, right? The guilt, the responsibility, it's all there.
It's like a turning point for her.
She can't deny the consequences of her actions anymore. The innocence is gone.
It's almost like that bell beetle, that symbol of hope we were talking about earlier. It dies in that moment. Yeah.
And it's interesting, both Electra and Mr. Nice, they react with fear to symbols of Addie's heritage and strength.
What do you mean?
The red bandana, her fire abilities, it's like they sense the power within her, and it threatens their own control.
That's a good point. They see her potential, and it scares them.
It all circles back to those themes of power and control that run throughout the whole story.
Yeah, Addie is constantly being pulled between these opposing forces,
Yeah.
trying to find her own agency in a world that wants to define her.
And then there's that final confrontation with her father in the lab. Oh man, the tension is so thick you could cut it with a knife.
It's like the whole story has been building to this moment.
The temperature fluctuations, the rising thermometer, the author does an amazing job of conveying that sense of mounting pressure.
You're right. You can practically feel the heat rising.
And that moment with the bell beetle, where Mr. Nice is completely frozen by fear.
It's almost comical, right? This ruthless figure brought down by a tiny bug.
But it also reveals this vulnerability we haven't seen in him before.
Like a crack in his armor.
Addie sees it too. She recognizes his weakness.
It's a brief but powerful shift in their dynamic.
But then, bam, that transformation at the end.
Totally unexpected.
Mr. Nice becomes something else, something monstrous.
Or is it all in Addie's head? A projection of her own fear and trauma.
It's that ambiguity that makes the ending so powerful, so unsettling.
It leaves you questioning everything you thought you knew about the characters, about the nature of evil itself.
So after diving deep into Addie's world, what are your biggest takeaways? What really stuck with you?
For me, it's the exploration of trauma, how it shapes us, and the importance of human connection, even in the darkest of times.
I agree. Those moments of compassion, like Addie's bond with Lucas, they offer these glimmers of hope in an otherwise bleak world.
They remind us that even when things are tough, we're not alone.
And that brings us to that final scene with Addie's mother giving her younger self the red bandana.
Such a powerful image, right?
Full of hope and foreboding all at once.
Yeah, it's like passing down this legacy of strength, but at the same time, it's heavy,
Like a weight she has to carry.
And it makes you think about those family ties, how they can be both a blessing and a curse.
Addie's mother, she wants to protect her, but she also knows she can't shield her from the world.
It's that balance, right, between wanting to keep your child safe and knowing they have to face reality eventually.
And the bandana, it becomes like a symbol of that whole struggle.
The strength of the women who came before her, but also the pain they endured.
It's like a physical manifestation of their shared history, both the triumphs and the tragedies.
Exactly, and it raises that question. Are we destined to repeat the mistakes of our past, or can we break free and create our own destinies?
Nature versus nurture, that whole debate.
Right. How much of who we are is predetermined, and how much is shaped by our environment, our experiences?
It's a question that's been pondered for centuries, and Sins of the Father definitely adds another layer to that conversation.
It doesn't give us easy answers, but it makes us think.
One scene that really stuck with me, it's when Addie's mother is sparring with her younger self. And Addie accidentally lands a punch, almost knocks the wind out of her mom.
Oh, yeah. It's a small moment, but it's so loaded with meaning.
Like a foreshadowing of Addie's potential for both violence and strength.
Even as a kid, she has this raw power.
And it makes you wonder, what if things had been different? Could that power have been channeled into something positive?
It's a tragic thought, but it also speaks to the resilience of the human spirit, Even in the face of adversity, there's always that potential for something better.
And it brings us back to that question we posed earlier. If you were Addie, what choices would you have made differently? How would you break free from that cycle of abuse?
No easy answers to that one, that's for sure.
But by engaging with Addie's story, we're forced to confront those complex issues, examine our own beliefs.
Exactly. It's not just about escaping a bad situation. It's about understanding the deeper forces at play.
The generational trauma, the societal pressures, it all feeds into the choices we make.
And that's what makes Sins of the Father such a powerful story. It doesn't offer solutions, but it makes us think critically about the world and our place in it.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what are your final thoughts? What really resonated with you?
It's tough to narrow it down, but I think the exploration of trauma, the cyclical nature of abuse, that really hit home for me.
Me too, and the importance of human connection, finding those glimmers of hope even in the darkest of places.
Right, those moments of compassion, those connections, they're what make life worth living, even when things are tough.
Absolutely. And if you haven't read Sins of the Father yet, I highly recommend it. It's a story that will stay with you, make you think differently about the world.
It's a story that challenges us, provokes us, and ultimately, I think, leaves us with a sense of hope.
Hope for a future where we can break free from the cycles of pain and create something new.
And that's a powerful message to leave on, don't you think?
Absolutely. This deep dive has been a whirlwind of emotions, thought-provoking discussions, and I hope you've enjoyed it as much as we have.
It's been a pleasure exploring Sins of the Father with you all.
And remember, even in a world that often feels bleak, there's always potential for change, for growth, for those sparks of hope that can guide us towards a brighter future.
Keep searching, keep questioning, keep connecting, and never give up on the power of human connection.
Beautifully said. And on that note, we'll leave you to ponder the complexities of Sins of the Father. Until next time, happy deep diving.